Good morning and welcome to Mosaic. I'm Rabbi Eric Weiss and I'm pleased to be here with you this morning on Mosaic. Literacy is a vital source to any society. Reading, writing, and engagement with language, these are part of the foundation of building any kind of healthy culture. This month is Jewish Book Month. It's also National Nonfiction Writing Month and also National Novel Writing Month. A little later in the show, we're going to have Howard Friedman, who's the librarian at the Jewish Community Library. But in the meantime, I'd like to introduce you to two authors. Debbie Cohen is an author who wrote a wonderful book called Keeper of the Scale, and Marcia Naomi Berger is an author, psychotherapist, and speaker who wrote a book called Marriage Meetings for a Lasting Love. Welcome, Debbie and Marcia. Naomi, shall we say Naomi or Marcia?
I'll answer to either. I go by Naomi usually.
Naomi. So, how did you each come to the idea of your respective books? Debbie, how did you come to Keeper of the Scale?
Well, I actually had a real-life diet partner, called her a diet buddy, and we used to meet at actually a store sort of similar to the store that I set my book scene in. And you know, we ended up just talking about anything and everything, but not dieting, and we sort of gave up on the dieting and just had fun meeting. And then one day I was in the store with her and I looked around and I thought, you know, I have this crazy idea for a book. And from there, I sort of like just took on a life of its own. And as circumstances had it, I happened to be doing an article for a magazine on a local Jewish author, Joshua Braff. And he put me in touch with his publicist, and the publicist said, you know, if you have some sample chapters, I'll give it to our editor here at Algonquin Publishing. And at that point, I hadn't even written one word, so I hurried and just got some sample chapters and got it to them. And then over the course of really 5 years, this editor back and forth read my entire book. So that sort of kept me going, actually.
Wonderful motivation.
Yeah.
And Naomi, how did you come to your book?
Well, my book started actually shortly after I got married. I'd been a therapist for a long time. I was considered the expert at agencies who taught other therapists how to work with couples and families. And then I got married. After I'd been doing that for a long time, I got married, and I realized that it's really different from the inside when you're married than when the outside, when you can be objective. And very shortly after we got married, we heard about this class called Time for a Better Marriage, and we took the class. It was about 8 weeks, one evening a week, and just a few minutes were spent on the idea of having a weekly marriage meeting. And that was what we took from the class and really, really used and consciously implemented. And then one thing led to another. After a while, I published an article about marriage meetings, and I started giving seminars and workshops, and finally the book evolved from that.
Fantastic. And I know we'll talk a little bit later about writing style. Everybody sort of has their own particular way of literally writing, whether it's pen, paper, pencil, on the computer. But I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit, Debbie, about how you actually came to publish your book.
So after I finished this book, and I had been going back and forth with this editor, his name is Chuck Adams, a very well-known editor, but they don't publish, my book is sort of more chick lit, and they don't publish that type of thing. So he suggested you really should get an agent, and that's one of the hardest things you can do is to get an agent, because they only take about 1% of writers on. But I pitched and pitched. I think I must have sent out to like 60 agents, and finally I got a really good agent, and he pitched it to all the big publishing houses, and they were all writing nice comments, great feedback, but unfortunately at that time this genre of chick lit was pretty much dead. And he was trying and trying, and I thought, I don't know if I want to wait. I don't know how long this could take. Is it ever going to happen? And at a certain point, I was getting good feedback from the publishing houses, although they were saying that they're just not taking on any more people right now with chick lit. So I just decided I'm just going to self-publish it. So I just went on through Amazon, and it started out as an ebook, and then I did it through CreateSpace as a print-on-demand, and it just got picked up by Barnes and Nobles. And I've been getting great feedback from, I'm on Goodreads, and readers from all over the world are, reading it, which I was really surprised. But I think independent publishing is really changing. It seems like it's a much more respectable way to go than it used to be.
And Naomi, how did you come to publish your book?
Oh, I met the editorial director of my publisher, New World Library, at a conference, National Women's Book Association conference in San Francisco. And she said she'd like to see my book proposal when it was ready. So I sent it to her. And I had also been talking with an agent who I like very much. We've become friends. Her name is Catherine Sands. But before either of us committed, Georgia told me that they wanted to publish my book.
Wonderful. Naomi, Debbie, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back in just a moment here on Mosaic. Welcome back to Mosaic. I'm Rabbi Eric Weiss. I'm pleased to be your host. We're in the middle of a wonderful conversation in honor of Jewish Book Month, National Novel Writing Month, and National Nonfiction Writing Month. And so we'd like to reintroduce you to Debbie Cohen, author of Keeper of the Scale, and Marcia Naomi Berger, author and psychotherapist, author of Marriage Meetings for a Lasting Love. Welcome back, Naomi and Debbie. We were talking about the ways in which you got published. Naomi, you got published in what people might think of as a traditional way with a publisher and a publishing house, and Debbie, you actually self-published, and by demand, I guess you could say, Barnes & Noble now has picked up your book, and there's just different ways of publishing. And so I wonder, for anybody out there who is in the middle of writing their book, looking for a publisher, just thinking about this issue, what kind of words of wisdom and encouragement you have for getting a publisher and getting your work out there?
Well, I would say, maybe first try and go through the traditional route if that's what you really want. But if that doesn't work out, to not give up and to don't despair over it. That there are other ways nowadays. It's just a whole new world in publishing, and even some established publishers have even jumped over to self-publishing if they're very well known and they can make more money that way. So it's sort of like the options are changing, and to not get discouraged if at first you don't succeed.
Well, I would say the first thing to do is to really write the best book that you can. You have a first draft, you have a second draft, you may have 5 drafts or 10 drafts or even more, but you want to turn in the best work you can, and then you do get the best chance of having an agent or a publisher. If you want to get your book published, you can get it published one way or another. So just concentrate on doing your job to get the best work you can, and hire editors if you're going to do it independently, and work well with your publisher when you get one.
You know, I was thinking earlier that in any culture, literacy takes on many, many different forms. And in our particular culture, in, let's say, the Americas, literacy primarily is the written word, reading, writing, the engagement with the word, the ways in which then that stimulates imagination, teaches what we learn, critical thinking. And I'm wondering, in this world where there's so much that goes on about where content arrives, whether it's on the web or on the computer or in the newspaper or in literally a book that you hold, there are electronic books, there are Kindle books, and I'm just wondering, from your perspective now as authors, as published authors, what do you think about this notion of the importance of language, the importance of writing, reading, and engagement with language as a kind of foundation to a vital and healthy culture?
Well, I think it's important to get people reading, and especially young people, reading and engaged no matter what the form. And nowadays, so many young people are using the e-readers and the e-books, and if they prefer to read it that way, fine, at least they're reading. Or for people who prefer, maybe some older people still really just want the real book that they can hold, great. I just think as long as there's many options of ways that people can read, the important thing is just to read and to get reading out there.
And Naomi, how did you actually write? Did you handwrite literally? Did you write on a computer? How did you literally construct your book?
I write every which way, but mostly on the computer. but I will, if I have an idea and I'm in bed, I'll pull out a pad and start writing that, and then I'll bring it to the computer and I'll develop it in a better way.
And Debbie, how did you actually write?
I wrote mostly on the computer, but also I always had a notepad with me, and if I was, sometimes the idea would come in the shopping store, sometimes I'd be at the carpool picking up my kids, and I had just an idea, I hurried and would scribble it down, and then later I'd go to the computer with it, but you have to always have that notepad. I agree with you.
The writing process is in some ways very complex. Sometimes it's somebody has a very distinct discipline, sometimes it's intuitive, and I'm wondering, it's kind of a big question, but how do you write? Do you wait for a moment of inspiration? Do you literally just sit down no matter what in your schedule, and whether you feel like it or not, you write for an hour? How literally do you engage yourself in literally the act of writing?
Well, I have a background as a journalist, so I'm used to writing on deadline, whether you feel like it or not. You can't really wait for the muse. So I think that actually helped me because, of course, there were many times I didn't feel like writing, but I had to. I just made myself the deadline that I have to do so much, even if I don't feel like it. And I think that's just thanks to years of having to write on deadline.
And Naomi?
Well, I like knowing that somebody cares that I'm writing. It's hard for me to write if I'm not going to get some feedback on it. So I like being in writing critique groups. And that way I have a deadline because we're going to meet and I have to have something ready to send by a certain date. So that was really, really important for me. I do not wait for inspiration. It's great when it comes. But if I'm going to write, I do. I sit down and write, and I will often block out time in my appointment book. I'm going to be writing from this time till this time.
Interesting. Naomi and Debbie, believe it or not, we're coming to the end of our time together. We're going to welcome in just a moment Howard Friedman from the Jewish Community Library, and in the meantime, we want to thank Debbie and Naomi for spending their time with us and so much enjoying their books, Keeper of the Scale and Marriage, Meetings for a Lasting Love. Debbie and Naomi, thank you so much for being with us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
We'll be right back in just a moment here on Mosaic.